Welcome to the Innovation and Compliance Podcast, part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Join us every week as we talk with industry innovators who are making compliance to help business run more efficiently and at the end of the day, more profitably. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. And today you're in for a very special treat because today I have with me Jordan Domash. He is the general manager at Relativity, and we are in Relativity's offices at 231 LaSalle in Chicago in what I can only describe as an uber cool recording studio. And we're going to talk today about the Relativity Trace solution that the company has and how you can use that in your compliance program. So Jordan, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for making the studio available and taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the kind words about the office and the company.
So Jordan, could you tell the audience a little bit about Relativity and your role at it?
Yeah, so Relativity's been around for over a decade. We started as an e-discovery software company. And for those of you that aren't familiar with e-discovery, it's a phase in litigation, in investigations, and regulatory response. We basically take all of the potential electronic evidence, sift through it, and find out what's relevant using machine learning and human review. I lead our Relativity Trace product, which is a communication surveillance and monitoring tool built on top of the Relativity platform for compliance purposes.
So, Jordan, one of the key areas in compliance is moving from detection to prevention. And really, prevention means a proactive approach. I was wondering if you could tell us how the Relativity Trace product can help in a proactive approach to compliance.
Yeah, so we've been in e-discovery for a long time. And when you think of e-discovery, it's really about detection. It's about how do you take a massive pool of unstructured data. It could be an email, it could be chat, it could be PowerPoints and loose files on a computer. And whenever there's a sign of a potential issue that needs to be investigated, we'll take tens of millions, hundreds of millions of files and sift through it really, really quickly, right? Using machine learning, using searching, using human review. And Relativity Trace is basically taking that whole suite of sophisticated capabilities and allowing you to now proactively detect risk by first, we create a set of rules. We have about 20 out-of-the-box policies that can help you detect things like bribery and corruption, insider trading, collusion and price fixing. So we take these 20 policies, you can customize them, add your own, and then we can proactively generate alerts when there's a potential compliance violation that we see over email or chat or some communication vehicle.
You know, you just gave us the title for this episode, Customizing Proactive Compliance Monitoring. This is a PG podcast, so I can't say what I'm really thinking, but that's absolutely brilliant. So when you say you can customize, can you actually sit down and work with a client or a customer to help create the rules, or as you call them, the policies around what they want to monitor?
Yeah, so we have lots of different ways where you can configure your rules. You can first start with using search terms, right? So specific keywords or complex keywords using proximity searching or fuzzy searching. So you can create your own set of specific lexicons that are of relevance and risk to you. You can use metadata filters. So the individual, the department that they're in, are they sending a communication to a high-risk company or domain? And then we also have machine learning models. So as your team is reviewing these alerts, you'll sometimes say, this is a bad alert, this is a false positive, or this is a good alert, this is something that's really risky. Our models learn programmatically over time and help quickly identify risky communications on your behalf, going beyond just what you've customized as an organization. One more thing to add, we also have a large community of service providers. So these are groups like the Big Four, large consulting firms that have practices to actually help you identify that risk. And so if you have this knowledge internally, great, we can work with you directly. Or if you need help from an expert who's solved this type of challenge before, they have their own learnings that they can bring on top of the platform.
Jordan, many of my listeners are in anti-corruption compliance, but there are many different types of compliance. Just last year, the Department of Justice had a release of best practices around anti-corruption compliance, around antitrust compliance. OFAC had a release around trade control and trade sanction compliance. Would it be fair to say that the Relativity tool is really law or risk agnostic, meaning it can look at really anything you program it for?
Yeah, so our out-of-the-box policies are built specifically for topics like that: anti-corruption, potential money laundering, other financial regulatory risks. But you can use it for whatever is relevant to your business. We work with niche customers that have specific problems that are relevant to them that may not be relevant to everyone else. And so, yeah, it can be super flexible to identify the specific compliance risks for your business.
I wanted to ask you about one of the e-discovery solutions I came across in doing research for this podcast, RelativityOne. Could you describe what that is and how a customer or client might use that?
Yeah. So RelativityOne is the SaaS version of Relativity. It's our e-discovery solution that can help you basically take a set of content as part of an investigation. So maybe there's been a hotline filing where someone has come to you and a whistleblower has said, hey, there's something that is risky, something that you need to investigate. You can use RelativityOne to run the full life cycle of the investigation from collecting and processing communications. So pulling out your emails and chats and all the attachments that could be relevant to this specific matter for this specific custodian. We then have the ability to search and review that content. So find what is relevant to the matter, run a review process that's defensible and audited. So this communication is relevant. This is not for this particular reason. Defensibility is really important in our world. And then if this was a result that required a production to a government entity or some other resolution, we have a whole suite of reporting and export and production capabilities as well. It's really the end-to-end life cycle of e-discovery for an investigation, for litigation, for government request, all in one single tool.
Could you explain a little bit more about what you meant by the term defensible?
Yeah. So defensibility is how you prove a specific process took place. From a technology vendor perspective, there's a lot of capabilities that we have. The one that's most important is auditing. So we have a permanent audit trail of every activity that happens in Relativity. So anytime someone conducts a search, anytime a review happens, who made that review, what decision they made, how they made that decision, when they made the decision, all of that is left in a perpetual format that is unable to be edited. And that record is there forever. So if you ever need to prove, I did this investigation, here's how I did it, and here's why we made the decisions we did, that record is always available.
Jordan, the call comes in to the hotline. Someone from compliance, someone from HR, someone from legal triages that report and determines that further investigation is warranted. At what step would you suggest they contact Relativity and bring you guys into the discussion?
Yeah. So honestly, as early as possible, we have customers when there's the first sign of a potential incident, potential wrongdoing, you want to know what happened. You want to know if there's real risk, maybe even before you conduct interviews, before you run a real process. You just want to understand what is my risk as a business, what really happened. And so you can kick off matter and Relativity pretty quickly. One thing to note is you don't always have to contact us directly. We have a whole set of law firms and service providers that provide these services already. So if you're a large organization and you send all of your investigations or your litigation to outside counsel or a service provider, it's quite likely they're using Relativity already. And so you might actually be using the Relativity technology already in some form in your organization.
One of the biggest risks for any corporation now is really around data privacy, and data protection. But that really leads back to information governance.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if the Relativity Trace tool can assist a company in information governance, and if so, how?
Yeah, information governance, I think we view it as a pretty broad term. There's a lot of problems and processes that kind of fall within information governance. The thing that Relativity Trace, our communication surveillance, helps with is proactively identifying risk, which we would say falls under information governance. So it has the ability to proactively generate high-risk alerts when there's high-risk communications happening in your business. It helps you understand when high-risk communication is leaving the business, whether to a personal domain or to a competitor. And so it helps build a proactive process to understand what's happening within your organization.
Jordan, my last series of questions really focused on what do you do after the report comes in, the call comes in, somebody raises their hand and speaks up. But there seems to be a completely another level of how the Relativity Trace tool can be used. And that really isn't a proactive approach to threat investigation, hunting and investigations. Could you really move us towards how you would see the tool being used in a proactive manner?
Yeah. So again, the first step is really setting up your rules. So you need to really think through what risk looks like. Are you an organization that does business in high-risk geographies where bribery and corruption is a big risk? Well, let's focus the policies and the rules to identify corruption. If you're in a financial services firm that's got a trading operation and you're particular risk is maybe insider trading, collusion, and interest rate fixing. Maybe it's market manipulation or market abuse. Well, we have the ability to create rules specific to that organization. And so, Relativity Trace is not a tool that will help identify any risk for everyone unknown, right? It's really built to help first define the specific risks that are relevant to your business, and then find potential instances of that happening within your organization that you want to know about and you want to take action on. I think what's really important about Relativity Trace is it's not just about the proactive alerting. It's not just, hey, here's a file, you should look at it. Here's an email that is sensitive that you need to take action on. It's the deep investigation that follows. It's really unraveling the story behind a individual email or communication and giving you the full e-discovery grade tools to really sift through that content and run your end-to-end investigation on top of the proactive alerting.
Some of the biggest investigations we have heard about are around big tech companies. I don't need to name them, but you know who they are. We use them every day, but both in the United States and in Europe, there are significant anti-competitive investigations. Would the Relativity Trace tool also work antitrust, anti-competitive, or similar investigation in the EU?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, the hairiest, the most complex matters that we run into in e-discovery, we call second requests. It's a process in a merger, a review process where we basically, when one company is acquiring another, you need to quickly identify whether there's a potential anti-competitive risk, and the appropriate regulating bodies will ask for a specific set of information that is relevant to the merger approval process. And our tool is used to quickly take potentially hundreds of millions of files, find what is relevant to the merger, and produce it to the opposing bodies in a very, very short amount of time with a ton of pressure, right? Because you have a potential acquisition, a merger that's on the line. So not exactly addressing the question that you asked, but there's lots of situations where anti-competitive pressures are relevant and you want to understand the story behind this particular risk. Did this behavior occur in the organization? Has any of my 100,000 employees said something relevant to inappropriately increasing prices or some other anti-competitive behavior over the last 10 years? Like, we're talking about a lot of content. You're not going to be able to read through emails manually to identify that anti-competitive behavior. It's going to take machine learning analytics and human review to really find that needle in the haystack, and we're often used to help with that.
Let me pick up on the phrase you used, human review.
Yeah.
Is that a part of the relativity solution in addition to the technological aspects you've talked about?
Yeah. So the core of any surveillance or e-discovery process is the ability to look at a individual record, an individual document, and say, is this relevant to my case or is that not? We call that human review. And so while you may be using searching or filtering to find those relevant communications, while you may use machine learning or analytics to basically take your human review and identify other content that is relevant to you, at its core is we've got attorneys, we've got investigators, we've got compliance professionals using the software and taking their specific knowledge about the case, about the compliance risks, and saying this is relevant or this is not what we're looking for. And that's at the core of what we do.
You also mentioned mergers and acquisitions. In the anti-corruption compliance world, M&A is a very important part of your compliance program. Would the Relativity Trace tool work in the M&A context looking at anti-corruption issues as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's multiple ways that it could be used. If you're running a due diligence process, you're acquiring a company, you want to investigate whether there is anti-competitive behavior that's being used, that would fall under our e-discovery suite of tools, right? An investigatory process to search through communications or other content to see if there's anti-competitive behavior that's going on. It also can be used in a proactive manner to identify risks in real time. So there's lots of anti-competitive workflows that are relevant in our world.
Jordan, I talk to a lot of top-notch law firms and lawyers in those firms who do internal investigations. And they uniformly say the first thing the government asks after you self-disclose or you get a subpoena is, are your documents secure? Is that something that you can help give the law firm who can then give the government the assurance that the documents are secure?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of tools that can help with that. We've got a legal hold tool, which basically can send a defensible notice to all employees that are all custodians that are relevant to this matter, that they are under an obligation to not delete any content that they have. We have a collect tool where we can basically pull content from the email repository, your archive, your other data sources to pull it into Relativity, centrally store it, and then maintain that chain of custody all the way through the end of a review process. So that's critically important, is making sure that the second that you're notified of a potential violation, what is your process of making sure that no data is lost? It's really important to our process.
Jordan, as a company moves through the investigative process with Department of Justice or a regulator, near some point in the process, they will ask, what is your audit trail? We want to see an audit trail of the documents you've looked at. We want to see an audit trail starting with the document hold. What did you look at? How did you look at it? And then what are your conclusions based on? Is that something that you or your team at Relativity can help a client with?
Yeah, for sure. So every action in Relativity is audited. Again, when someone looks at a document, when someone ingests a document, when you search it, when you create a new rule or term in Relativity Trace, right? When you configure your compliance policies, that's all audited. It's all exportable. It's all filterable. It's all searchable. And so it's very possible to take a look at your audit trail, that we call it, find the relevant behavior or the whole history of the matter, the investigation, or the compliance process, and share that with regulators.
So one of the things you've said several times in this podcast is about machine learning capabilities. One of the things that frustrations I had many years ago when I was involved in e-discovery, particularly around reviewing emails and conversations that were reduced to writing, was false positives. How specifically can machine learning help to reduce the universal bugaboo of false positives?
Yeah, so there's a lot of capabilities here. And when we talk to customers, too many alerts, too many false positives, not enough relevant content. It's a big problem in the industry today. And we've got multiple tools that can help with this. The first is, I wouldn't even call this crazy machine learning. It's technology that's widely used in e-discovery today. It's things like email threading, deduplication, filtering out disclaimers, right? So before even going to the crazy complex machine learning that we have a set of capabilities that when you deploy it can immediately reduce by half the amount of alerts that are generated. So just by pulling out duplicate communications or near duplicate communications and only review one copy of them, that will reduce the amount of content. What we call email threading. If I send an email to you, you respond to me, that response will have both of the email communications within it. So there's no need to review the original communication because I've reviewed that email already as part of the follow-up email. And so being able to identify the inclusive threads that contain all of the content, that can cut down the amount of alerts that you generate immensely. So that's kind of one bucket of basic features that in the discovery world are widely used in most large matters. We can deploy those in a proactive way to reduce the amount of alerts. We then have what's called active learning. So active learning is a way that we can proactively generate a risk score that goes beyond individual lexicons and individual keywords. So yeah, you might have some specific keywords that are relevant. We've got complex lexicon searching. But what active learning allows you to do is it takes all of the prior decisions that your team has made. And so if you're going through and reviewing hundreds of documents a day and saying, this is a good alert, this is a bad alert, all of the examples of good alerts, all the examples of bad alerts contain a lot of insight, right? There's patterns in good alerts, there's patterns in bad alerts. And we want to basically take all of the examples of bad alerts and ignore them in the future. And so our machine learning algorithm generates risk scores, right? It will generate a score of 0 to 100. 100 is something that's really risky. You should look at it. 0 is something that's not very risky. And so we can start to develop themes around what is spam? What is a personal communication? What is content that is not going to be relevant to your compliance review? And we can exclude that. And the last bucket of analytics that we have is a set of machine learning analytics that lets you, maybe you find something interesting, maybe you find an alert that requires an investigation. How do you quickly find the whole story around it? How do you discover the truth and unravel the thread of a particular alert and do that really, really quickly? So we have things like find similar. So you can highlight a paragraph in an email and say, hey, I don't know what this means. It looks kind of interesting and I want to understand more about it. Find me every other email, every other chat, every other phone call that tells me the same story as this paragraph that can help explain it. It may not use the exact same keywords. It may not use the exact same language, but the concepts within this paragraph tell me a lot, and I want to understand a lot more of it. And so what's important is not just the machine learning that can help you reduce false positives right away, but it's the full collection of tools that Relativity Trace and Relativity give you to really quickly go through your process and spend less time on junk communications, on false positives, and more time on actually conducting an investigation and identifying risks in your business.
It seems to me in that last answer, you came close to talking about continuous monitoring and utilizing the information through the machine learning to identify risks, risk rank those risks, present those risks to someone for review if needed, but also refine those risks. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. So actually, it is a continuous active learning process. It's not something that requires stepping out of the box and tuning and training a model. The system is doing that for you. So every time you give the system information, right? Every time you say, Relativity Trace, this is a good alert. I want to escalate this. I want to investigate it. Relativity Trace, this is a bad alert. This is a false positive. We want to ignore things like this. The system will automatically generate that risk score, and it's continuous in nature. And there's no additional process that's necessary to tune and train the engine.
Jordan, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time today, but I was wondering if listeners wanted more information on Relativity Trace, where could they go to find out?
Yeah, so relativity.com/trace has all of our information. You can learn about the product. You can reach out for a demo. We'd love to chat with you.
Great. Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
If you're a compliance professional looking for a convenient and effective way to fulfill your continuing education requirements, go to fcpacompliancereport.com/courses and choose from 4 hour-long training packages that will keep you current. That's fcpacompliancereport.com/courses.